G'day, Mac Race here. I want to do a quick video on Elon Musk and Twitter, and particularly around one pertinent question. How many people does it take to build and maintain a piece of software? All right, let's jump into it. I've got a few articles I want to run through, and I want to get your thoughts on how many people you think it takes to build and run a piece of software. So the first comment I came across on LinkedIn was by a guy called Mike Verman. Now, Mike makes an interesting point here. He goes, like it or not, if he pulls off this Twitter thing, it will change the software product industry. If he can keep it running on 10% of the headcount and make it profitable, a lot of CEOs are going to want to copy the Musk model. It's still a big if though. That's a really interesting point. Obviously, that's been widely publicized around Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, as well as the firing of a number of staff within their company. Various counts have them having around 8,000 staff to begin with, and now we're down to sort of 2 to 1,000 staff. So that's a cut of nearly 75 to 90%. Twitter is still functioning, whether it's in the same way, better or worse, that's up for debate. But essentially what Mike is saying here, which is very correct, is the business was currently operating with 8,000 staff, and it's still operating with near a quarter of that. How many people does it really take to build and maintain a piece of software? I want to jump over and quickly. There was a really good podcast I watch called the All In Podcast, and Elon actually featured on one of the episodes, and this is a sort of a quote directly from him. He says he's reduced the cost structure by a factor of 3 to 4 times, but releases are actually faster into production. Obviously, none of this is verifiable. We don't know how much cost has been reduced, and we also don't know how many features are being released into production. It's also very hard to say whether a feature is released faster or slower, because obviously features can be on varying sizes and complexities. But if this is true, this is obviously something that's really interesting. It sort of goes back to the analogy around, is there too many chefs in the kitchen? And then things start slowing down. Elon is obviously trying to go in and save a company from going bankrupt. So the first thing he's trying to do is cut costs. Off the flip side, what's happened here is he has cut costs, but on his own admission, he has increased productivity. If I go back to my original question, how many software developers does it take to build a product? Well, it's a really interesting question. I came across another comment that I found on LinkedIn that I want to just run through from David Anderson. He's a former GM and tech director at Amazon. He poses a number of other questions and gets you maybe thinking in a different couple of ways. Why does Twitter have thousands of engineers when a single good engineer could prototype Twitter in a few days? Why do startups have 10 people build faster than a team of 100? And why do products change rapidly at first and then stagnate? Really good questions, and he goes on to answer them in a few ways. So I'll answer those in a second before I start talking about it. Executives say they want their teams to produce more with the assumption individuals can work faster. It's unlikely that skillful management can change your typing speed, thinking speed, or your knowledge. The fundamental value you add every hour won't change, and I won't go into the depth of why 10 to 12 hours, 6 to 7 days work bad. Burnout is a thing, 100% agreed. People only have a certain amount of productive hours in a day. Working people longer and harder is really not going to get more output, particularly in software development. Agile versus Kanban versus Scrum companies don't have advantages over each other. Ruby on Rails versus Python isn't a dividing line. Once you learn an okay tool, it tends to get the job done. So what does change things? Very good points here. I'm on board with this because people really get caught up in the details. Scrum, Agile, Kanban, doesn't matter. What tools you use, doesn't matter. It's all about the output you can achieve and the problem you're solving and whether that's of value to the client. Now this sentence is really key. As you grow a product, it gets more complex. Just remember that. Imagine a product like Amazon's retail website. The site supports various languages, digital and physical products, ads, beta tests, and so on. The smallest change can take 30 to 60 teams working for weeks to implement because every piece connects to every other piece, every feature needs to be maintained, every server needs to be patched. How do you reduce the cost of building new features? Now, before I jump down, have a think about how you would reduce the cost of new features and what this is sort of illustrating. My thoughts here, and I've seen this personally myself as well, is when you're starting, obviously you have a small bit of software and a small bit of code. You have not very many dependencies, and there's not much going on. There's very few use cases you're supporting, and there's very few things to go wrong. As you get larger, there's more code and there's more things to understand. Maintenance becomes the largest overhaul of the whole thing. It's why I've got a saying that says that it takes 10% of the time to write the code and 9% to maintain it. And I'll go into some other videos around what that means in physical terms for the code and how you should write. But essentially it's what they're drilling into here. How do you reduce your maintenance and cost to your team? How do you increase productivity of a team and company without hiring more people? The answer is to simplify it. Treat every piece of technology as a weight around your neck. How much time you spent estimating, scheduling, and building new work, and how much time you spent evaluating your product and deciding what to depreciate and delete. I bet it's 5% or worse. And what he's sort of saying here is that a lot of companies, and I've seen this before, simply add items to their backlog and they keep on building features and features and features. They never go back and have a look at the features inside their business and see if they're 1, being used, or 2, adding value. Having them in there and having to maintain those features is an extremely costly thing. It's not something that's hugely visible, but it is visible because it's the amount of people you're required to maintain it. And he goes on to really illustrate this in one very good sentence. The single largest productivity tool for an organization is the delete button. It's challenging to recognize which features, internal or external, are objectively worth the maintenance cost. Companies are aggressive about pushing out new features, but need to be just as aggressive about removing things. And this is a point I highly agree on. The analogy I can use here is really about restaurants. And I know Gordon Ramsay bangs on about this. He's probably one of the most famous people to do this. Is that restaurants, what they continually do is they start off with a nice simplified menu. And then they go through and they start adding more and more dishes to the menu. And what that does is that starts really complicating the back of house, ordering more foods, more dishes, more cooks. Is that better value add for their clients? Well, not really. Is that more profitable business? Well, not really. And that's what happens in SaaS companies. They keep adding more and more products to their lineup. And what they really need to do is simplify their product, look at the key features that deliver value in that product, and then delete functionality that is not needed. Now, I came across an interesting comment on one of these things, which is going to add counter to this argument, and I want to read it out just for clarity. I've often found that getting a feature to 90% complete tasks takes about as much time as the remaining 10%, and that's 100% true. A startup can get by with 90%, while a company like Amazon cannot. You cannot ship a feature or product and launch an ad campaign with real money on the line without metrics. There is a certain diminishing return as you add more people to a project, and even small differences can have a large impact on overall results. I agree with both of these, and what he's really saying is that while yes, you can delete your way to functionality, what happens is as you get more and more involved in the market and you get more and more feedback, you're going to tweak your use cases to be more and more niche. Now what that means is that if you had 10 features at the start, while supporting 10 features might be fine, as those features become more nuanced and there's more functionality within each of those features, you may actually have to cut down those 10 features you had to 5. Because if you can get into a market and be that last 10%, that's what's going to be the defining factor for people signing up to your business. A lot of people these days sign up, and if the product can do 80% of what they want, it doesn't really fit for them and they don't keep going. It's that product that's really dived deep into their niche and does exactly what they want that they keep onto. And there's a final comment here I want to talk about from Burton. Now, Burton sort of summarizes this up in a really interesting way that I haven't looked at before, but it's some way that sort of resonates with me because of the analogy I've used. I've always thought the software generally has about a 30-year life cycle in the fact that you have 10 years building it and trying to build market trust. You have 10 years of adding features and functionality, and you have 10 years of roll-off. And the reason for that last 10 years of roll-off is because your product becomes so complex and so difficult, adding changes to that product becomes very hard. You start having to quote more and more, and you have more and more cost bases, and therefore these people start looking at these new companies who have just started in their greenfield and they start swapping to them. There is a risk tolerance there, and it's why those companies generally have a 10-year runoff. But Burton illustrates this in a really key way. Many companies have principles around simplification, but little is actually achieved due to lack of quantifiable goals. A tech executive once told me that perhaps the best thing to do is redesign and rewrite your product every 7 years. If you don't, somebody else does it for you. That's 100% correct. Because what happens is, over those 7 years, the market moves. At the same time, you also niche down into your features. What that means is that your features have slightly tweaked and changed. And while there was some engineering done at the very start, at the end now, if you had a look at a clean scope, you'd actually be able to build it far easier, cheaper, and simpler. And at the same time, be able to maintain it far easier. The summary here is, while Elon is doing something that's really interesting, whether it comes off or not is to be seen. But the end goal that he's trying to do is actually something that a lot of businesses can apply. And that is, you probably have too many developers on the books, but the reason for that is because you probably support too many features. And therefore, the biggest thing you can do is try and simplify your build, simplify the amount of features, and then cut down on your costs. We're moving into a world where profitability is something that's really going to be the gold standard. And the only two ways to increase profitability are to increase revenue or reduce costs. Increasing revenue is a long-term goal and something that takes a bit longer, whereas reducing costs is something that's fairly easy. Deleting features, removing developers is something you can really do in the short term, and it's really going to help you move forward and drive your product into those niche areas. I wish Elon the best, and he's sort of doing this out in public, which is something that's fantastic. And let's see if it transpires. Twitter may fall into a heap and become bankrupt, or it might become the successful model for people to build software going forward.